I'm Kimberly Hughes, Drew's mom, and I wanted to talk a little bit about what happened on June 28th, 2013. It was a Friday night in the summer, so it was lighter later in the evening, and that night Drew's dad, my husband, had to work late. I had gone over to a neighbor's house, a friend, and kept talking with David on the phone, wondering when he was going to get home and that sort of thing. Finally, I told him that I couldn't wait anymore, that I really needed to feed the kids, and so I went home, and Drew was there with his one friend, but then there was about 6 other neighborhood friends in the house too, and it was just you know, a typical night, I guess, but they were playing music, and they were just being loud and laughing and, you know, picking on each other and, you know, being typical 13-year-old boys, I guess, and just very happy, summertime boys at the beach. And so I went ahead and fixed a plate for them, for Drew and his friend Bradley, and Zach came home about that time. He had gotten off a little bit early. It was about 7:30 at night, and so he was eating dinner too. Well, Drew ate really quickly, and then the 6 or 7 boys were out the door, you know, like the wind, and they all jumped on their skateboards, and they were just gone. So all the noise and the laughter and everything just kind of went out the door, and Zach and I were just, you know, enjoying each other's company. And it was less than 5 minutes after they had left, Drew's friend Bradley came back and said, that Drew had wrecked on his skateboard and was hurt. And so Zach ran out and jumped on his skateboard, and he sort of half ran and half skateboarded down the street to where they were. And I didn't know how far they were, so I got in our Suburban and drove down there. And one of Drew's friends had already called 911, so I ended up taking the phone and finishing the conversation with the 911 dispatcher. But Drew was laying in the street, and I sat down and right at his head, and he kept trying to get up, and I kept telling him to lay down because, and that's what they told me, you know, not to move him unless he was in the middle, you know, unless it was dangerous for traffic, which it wasn't. So he was there, and he was kind of on the side, towards the side of the road, and I talked to him the whole time while we were waiting for the ambulance to get there, and I'd ask him questions, you know. I'd say, Drew, or I'd say, you know, what's your name, what's your full name, and he'd tell me, and where do your brothers go to school, and he'd say East Carolina. I said, where do you want to go to school, and he said NC State. I mean, he answered all the questions right, and he kept trying to get up, and he said he wanted to go home. And I said that he needed to stay there and that we were going to take him to see his dad. So my neighbor, who had joined us or was there when I got there, he gave me some really good advice, and he said, when the ambulance gets here, don't give him a choice, just get in the back. And so I'm extremely thankful for that, because that was me riding with him to the local hospital was my last conversation with him. There was nothing that made me think that he wasn't going to live.
I'm David Hughes. I'm Drew's father. I was working late that night. It was Friday night, and I was a systems analyst working on computers at the hospital, and my son Zach called me and told me that Drew had been involved in an accident. So immediately then I just walked over to the emergency room in the hospital, and I told them that I wanted Drew as soon as they could, when he got there, I wanted him transferred to Greenville, up to Valiant Hospital, to be checked out by a specialist. And I kept getting phone calls from my wife and from Zach, and the more I talked to them, especially my wife, he was talking to her and she was talking to him, and so I was feeling a lot better about what, from when I initially got the phone call. So he came into the emergency room, and I was with him by his bed the entire time. There was never any question in my mind that he wasn't going to be okay. When we went in to do the CT scan, there was actually a moment where they needed to take off his shorts in order to get a lower X-ray of the CT of his spine, and he kind of did an expletive that no, I was not taking off his shorts in front of the nurses. And I was like, Drew, you're all right. You're gonna, I promise you, no one's gonna see anything. I'm gonna keep on your boxers. I just gotta pull down your shorts. And the folks behind the glass, they were kind of laughed. I knew most of them too from working there, and we all were kind of laughing about it. And he looked at me and he's like, Dad, he's like, I'm scared. And I'm like, Drew, you're gonna be fine. It was raining that night, and they couldn't they couldn't come pick him up, and so the decision was made they were going to transport him by the ambulance up to Greenville, which is about an hour-and-a-half trip. I think they were nervous about making an hour-and-a-half trip with him in the back. We weren't allowed to ride in the ambulance with him from the hospital here to Greenville. There wasn't enough room, and they were going to have to sedate him. And as a precautionary measure, the way it was put to me, they wanted to intubate him in case there were any problems. I guess because they wanted to sedate him so that he was completely calm or whatever. And I think it was described to me, as more as a precautionary measure. They wanted to intubate him. And my first reaction was like, why? He's breathing on his own. I instantly kind of had a bad feeling in my gut about that. But after talking to the doctor, I was like, well, the worst thing that's going to happen is he's going to sleep for an hour and a half and then get to where he's going. And so we, they finally, when everything got arranged, it took a while, but once everything got arranged, we got in our car and started following the ambulance to Greenville. And we had to stop one time. They had to switch crews. They did that, and then we got started again, and we made it just into probably about 10 more minutes, and they pulled off on the side of the road. And my wife said she saw Drew sit up in the back of the ambulance, and I couldn't see him from where I was sitting on the driver's side. She was sitting on the other side. She could see in the back window better, and we sat there, and in no time, again, there was nothing. I knew there was nothing wrong. I said, I couldn't figure out why they were stopped, but I never did it cross my mind that anything bad was happening or anything had gone wrong or whatever. It was just one of those things. I was just like, well, maybe, because they had stopped once to switch crews. I don't know why maybe it was, I don't know why I was just so sure that nothing was wrong. I mean, at one point, after about 10 minutes of sitting there, I did get out, and I walked back, knocked on the back window of the ambulance, and the nurse on the back gave me a thumbs up. And so I went back and I said, see, honey, I said, he's gonna be fine. They had to get him adjusted or whatever. And so we got started again, and we probably weren't 3 or 4 minutes after the ambulance started back up again, the ambulance just floored it. I mean, they took off. And I was keeping up with them, and we actually got stopped by a highway patrolman following, when we were following the ambulance. And so we lost the ambulance. And The stop didn't last probably literally maybe 30 seconds. He walked up to the car and he explained what was going on. He said, look, drive careful, please be safe or whatever. But at that point, we didn't know that we had lost the ambulance. We went on to Greenville. We didn't know that the ambulance had diverted to a closer hospital. Because we got divided, and when we were coming into Greenville, we got a call from the ambulance saying that they had to stop, that he had pulled his tube out, and that they had to stop and get him resituated again. And when they got to Greenville, we had somebody, a counselor, meet us there, and we started getting a bad feeling then. And they took us into a family room. They immediately met us and just something that didn't seem right. And anyway, they finally arrived, and the doctors, it was whatever amount of time it was, and the doctor came in after a little bit and told us that he had no brain activity. And it was like someone just hit you with a sledgehammer in the chest. And it's like, my wife had come up to me before we left the hospital here, and they, she said, let me kiss him bye. And they had already had him intubated and everything like that. And I was like, look, you can kiss him when he gets to Greenville, he's fine. And I always regret that. When he came in and told us that, he had no brain activity, instantly I knew that something happened. And the doctor there even said something to us about the fact that when he was intubated, that sometimes, if the tube wasn't quite placed in the right place, he wasn't getting quite enough oxygen. We spent the next, till 5:25 the next day, with Drew, watching him. And I can remember, we were in the pediatric ICU unit, and I can remember, me and my wife both, we can remember, it's kind of like, there was one point during the night when I looked at my wife and I said, he's not there anymore. He's just, you could kind of tell, how Drew just had so much life to him, and you could tell when it was not there. And so we found out later on what happened on the trip up was he had woken up in the back of the ambulance and with a tube in his throat, and he didn't know anybody around him. He was scared. And his first instinct, from having two older brothers that he fought with, wrestled with, competed with on a daily basis, he was a fighter. And he woke up in the back of an ambulance when he was asleep. He was asleep when he left the hospital, and then next thing you know, he wakes up and he's in a space he doesn't know where he's at with people who he doesn't know. And he's got a tube in his throat, and the initial reaction is to pull it out, and that's what he did. And the paramedic that was on board the truck, they administered a drug called vecuronium, which is a paralytic. They had a respiratory therapist on board, and she re-intubated him a couple minutes later. And it always bothered, that always worried me that if, that he was aware even for a little bit of time. When you're paralyzed, you can't move, but he was he still awake? And that's one of those things I can't even go there. I don't think he was. I think it happened so quickly, but when the tube was placed back in, it wasn't placed properly, and Once he was reintubated, his oxygen level dropped instantly. And over incremental periods in the records, it was down to 40% within 3 or 4 minutes. And he was suffocating. He wasn't getting oxygen. And the tube was never removed. The breathing tube was never changed. The equipment that you're required to use to check, that you're intubated properly wasn't used. And basically, Drew went for about 30 minutes without oxygen. When they diverted to a closer hospital on the way to Greenville, they instantly recognized what had happened. And they corrected it instantly, but it was too late at that point.